Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. More disturbing news from Canada. The leadership of the Cowessess First Nation says more than 750 bodies have been found in unmarked graves at a former residential school in Saskatchewan. They are treating this case as a crime scene. The graves are near the Maryville Indian Residential School, and they come in addition to the shocking news of 215 graves recently discovered at another residential school in Kamloops. The remains are in unmarked graves in a communal gravesite first used in 1885. The Catholic Church removed the headstones at some point in time, and the tombstones were never replaced. The school was founded and operated by the Roman Catholic Church beginning in 1899 on what was then the Maryville Reserve. The First Nation, with help from an underground radar detection team, began the search 3 weeks ago. While the radar detector has spotted 750 graves, it has a 10% margin of error. Cowessess First Nation Chief Cadmus Delorme says he does not know how many people's remains might be discovered. Every grave will be verified by a technical team in the coming weeks. Because this was a Catholic-run boarding school, the chief says Pope Francis must apologize for what happened. He says that's just one stage in a healing journey. This news comes as Interior Secretary Deb Haaland announced an investigation into Native American boarding schools run by the U.S. government. A racial equity panel in Kansas is examining schools' use of offensive and derogatory Native mascots. The panel could issue recommendations for public schools and colleges to eliminate the use of American Indian mascots, nicknames, or imagery. It was established 1 year ago after the murder of George Floyd and calls for criminal justice and racial equity policy reforms. Despite long-standing criticism, some schools in Kansas still use American Indian mascots and logos. Sean Watts, who is Cherokee, is the director of the Tribal Law and Government Center at the University of Kansas. Watts told the Commission on Racial Equity and Justice the time has come to remove the imagery from schools. The Commission is currently preparing its mid-year report to the governor and Kansas legislature. In Central California, Native Americans are petitioning to rename Squaw Valley because the name is a racial slur. KMPH reports the petition on change.org has received more than 13,000 signatures in support of the name change. The idea for the petition came after a nearby ski resort made plans to change its name. The group is hosting virtual town halls to help educate the community on the negativity surrounding the name. Roman Raintree, who is a citizen of the Dunlap Band of Mono Indians, says the fight is continuing beyond the county's Board of Supervisors.
People have been actively trying to change it since the 90s, ran into their own road barriers, and fell by the wayside. So we're just picking up the baton. And if we don't get anywhere with these current supervisors, the next generation was following us and is watching what's going on, and they will be picking it up. So this isn't going to go away. And this is an issue that needs to be addressed because it's indicative to intergenerational trauma in our communities.
The group wants to adopt the name Noom Valley. That means the people in the Western Mono language. Raintree says it would honor the area's indigenous legacy. The Blackfeet Nation in Montana is making plans to take back its food system. Its agricultural resource management plan paves the way for a beef and bison processing plant owned and operated by the nation. The tribal nation covers 1.5 million acres and only has 2 grocery stores. Both are located in the town of Browning. For the past several years, the Blackfeet have been focused on mapping out a longer-term plan to make food more available, according to a story by the Natural Resources Defense Council. The tribe is working to enable its citizens to raise more plants and livestock in order to regain their food sovereignty. Besides providing much-needed fresh food, the plant will also help boost the local economy by offering jobs and buying from local ranchers. The plan is in the final stages of development. No word on how soon the meatpacking plant will become a reality. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalonghungva. On the program today is the new director of the largest Native American association.
And we hear about a public safety study from the largest tribe, the Navajo Nation. The National Congress of American Indians is holding its mid-year conference this week, and it's already had a major announcement made at the annual meeting. Joining us today to talk about the conference is the Chief Executive Officer, Dante Desiderio. Welcome, Dante.
Thank you, Mark. Fieldhook, great to be here.
Let's start with the big announcement made by Interior Secretary Deb Haaland.
Yeah, the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, our very own Native Secretary, had come in and made a big announcement the other day on the boarding schools, which has generated an incredible amount of interest, and I think it's remarkable. And it really shows the difference of what it's like to have a Native woman secretary who understands these issues. I think it's a new day for Indian country. And just on this announcement, we're obviously really pleased that the U.S. government, through Department of Interior, would be investigating the practices of boarding schools. Our elders and prior generations have really gone through a lot: the forced assimilation, the cultural whitewashing, and even forced labor, high rates of abuse. And all of this has gotten to the point where a lot of the elders are really have a great deal of difficulty talking about it. And from what we've heard just from this announcement, we see a lot of the elders really pleased that the US government is really going in this direction. And I think it really allows them to tell their story, which I think was an important question for the secretary. Are you going to be collecting stories and hearing our voices and really allowing the people who went through this experience to be able to express themselves? And that's all part of this new commission. So we're really happy to see that. And also, I think it's worth noting the incredible, this is an incredible story that just hasn't gotten out in the mainstream before. We see now another school in Canada having discovered more cemeteries of Native children. And I think it's really raised a lot of awareness. And it's also, the idea that you come into an Indian school and, you start off by calling our children hostages, like they did in the colonial period, and they also done at Carlisle Indian School. And you also start out with the idea that it's okay to have cemeteries in these schools where our children won't be coming home. You really get the idea and the sense that those attendees never really had a childhood, and far too many just didn't have a chance to come home. So this tragic story, I think this truth needs to come out. It needs to breathe. And I'm glad the Secretary of Interior is really taking this on from the federal government side and taking responsibility.
Well, and when you look around the world, so many other countries have come to some sort of reconciliation process. And in a way, as stunning as this announcement was, the United States is really last. Other countries have been dealing with this for quite some time, from South Africa to Canada. This is a big deal in that sense too, isn't it not?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of having this as a reconciliation is really important. And you're right, it is far overdue. And I am really interested, and I think Indian country is, on having these stories come out. I think one of the things that we see in mainstream America is this incredible indifference to Indian history. You know, we saw it in Rick Santorum with the assumption that nothing was here before Europeans came. We have an incredible history and we have incredible stories to tell. And I think in this age of inequity and social inclusion, this is the right time to start telling those stories. And I think it's also the right time, and that it's absolutely necessary for Indian country to start healing, is to be able to have this kind of reconciliation. So I see this as the start of us being able to tell our stories, and also this might not be the only story that we're going to be telling over the next few years with with the social movement and the equity movement, and trying to address this indifference. We need to tell our stories. We need to be able to heal.
Before we shift gears too much, let me just ask you, this administration has tapped a lot of talent from Indian country. Is that representation already making a difference?
It is. And I think what's different this time, Mark, I think that's a really good point, that we have really good, talented people, natives in the administration at higher levels than we've had before. But there's another thing going on with this administration. We heard from Secretary Granholm the other day with Department of Energy. We've never had a Department of Energy secretary so in tune with Indian country and some of the needs, and also coming out with a statement the other day of saying they are going to be looking at being respectful for sacred sites, and the idea that energy production is necessary, but so is the inclusion of tribes on these energy projects. So the other, we're going to hear from the Secretary of Commerce today, who's going to be saying similar things. They introduced the broadband initiatives a couple of weeks ago, and they're remarkably in tune to Indian country. So not only having the Indian staff, Indian talent going into the administration, but also having a receptive audience at the highest levels. And you see that also in Department of Treasury, who's now responsible for a lot of the outflow of capital for Indian country. They're digging in a whole lot more. They're holding, record listening sessions, which people are actually learning from on the federal side as well. So I think this is a great change for this administration, and it's a great time for Indian country to really look at these longstanding issues and a receptive audience and trying to get things done. From the White House down, it's a priority to listen to Indian country and involve in Indian country, and not just on the administration, but we have an infrastructure bill that's rolling through. We've had the multiple relief efforts that have included Indian country. It's not a question anymore of whether or not you include Indian country. It's a question of how much you include Indian country. And one of the remarkable things we've seen from the CARES Act to the American Rescue Plan is the inclusion of Indian country of discretionary funding. This is an elevation of our governments and a rightful recognition of having tribal leadership make the decisions that are appropriate for their communities. And I think when we look back at this time, we're going to be looking back at this discretionary funding as a real turning point in self-determination. So this is great to see the involvement of natives in this administration, the higher level impact they're having, but also seeing things come together in Congress and the administration.
Let me ask you about the mechanics of the National Congress mid-year meeting. It's we're coming out of the pandemic. It's still virtual, but this may be the last all virtual meetings. First, how does this meeting look to you, and how do you see meetings going forward?
Well, Mark, Indian country likes to gather. So this is very difficult to come together and create a sense of community through your computer screen. So we're trying to do that as best we can. We're trying to get Q&A for this. We're trying to create discussion as we normally would when we all see each other, but it's no way a substitute for us getting together, hugging each other and talking about things and getting passionate about ideas in person. So we are really hopeful that this will be our last virtual meeting, and we'll be moving out to Sacramento in the fall to really get together and start debating these ideas in person. I think overall, though, the interaction around some of the resolutions, how seriously our leaders are taking some of these issues that are coming up, it's really good to see in this, to see the mechanics still working, but there is definitely a lot missing if we're not able to get together.
Since you mentioned resolutions, which ones kind of come to the surface for you?
Well, I think in the resolutions, the theme that's come together for me this week has been climate change. We've got a few resolutions on those, or related resolutions, about salmon runs and things like that. When we got together as the full board for NCAI and the regional representatives were giving their updates, every one of the leaders gave an update on climate change and how it's impacting their region. So you see things in California that are burning at record rates, and you see things in Alaska and the Northwest where the salmon runs, or the king salmon run in Alaska, is one of the lowest ever. So hopefully that might recover, but all of these impacts are working their way into tribal communities, and these treaty rights and the established tribal communities, the philosophy of sustainability is all being impacted, even in Montana, where they're having fires. So it's coming further inland, or in the southeast. The storms, or the hurricane season, starts earlier with a major storm just a few weeks ago. So it's impacting everyone, and to have all of the different regional representatives say that as part of their updates is really important. And also, it's not just, we're all engaged in this. This is a priority for Indian country, and you're going to see NCAI and the leadership really leading on this and trying to engage with the other powers that be and really influence policy on this. This is our story. It's our philosophy. We should be at the table making decisions on sustainability and how all of this impacts our people. So those resolutions in particular are important, or taking on a greater sense of importance during this conference.
You mentioned capital and the injection going into tribal communities. What are tribal leaders saying about how that's going to work?
Well, the tribes receive some money through the population formula from Treasury. The next round is based on the economic formula, which is based on employment. Department of Treasury is coming in today to make some, to talk about this effort and take questions from tribes. And hopefully we're going to see an announcement soon on what that looks like for employment to have that next round go out. But I see that Treasury is willing to listen. They're having more flexibility this time around. And I do think tribes are using this money to plan and try to coordinate it with infrastructure going forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Dante Desiderio, the CEO of the National Congress of American Indians. When we come back, our reporter talk back with Arlyssa Becenti from the Navajo Times. A public safety study says the Navajo Nation needs 750 police officers to meet community demand. There's less than 200 in a land base the same size as New Hampshire, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island combined. Arlyssa Becenti reported on the study, and ICT shared it earlier this month with the headline, Navajo Police Need 775 New Officers, report says. Thanks for joining us, Arlyssa.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about the basic findings of this report.
Well, there's so much found within this first ever commissioned report that the Navajo Nation has. They partner up with a consultant called Strategy Matters out of Boston. And for 18 months, this company came out to Navajo Nation, spoke with communities, 110 chapters within the Navajo Nation, chapter officials, leadership, and especially the police officers. And they saw the needs of the Navajo Nation, and it was something that had to be done in order for police leadership to figure out what they can do to enhance their program. And right now, the biggest thing is showcasing how much the Navajo Nation Police Department lacks in police officers. Like it says, there needs to be 775 officers. But in reality, that will be impossible because of the budget. The budget that the Navajo Nation Police gets is from BIA and the federal government 638 contracts. And that hasn't changed within the 10, 15 years. So even with salary increase, the need for different equipment, the increase in policing, basically, it's increased over the years, but what they've gotten from 638 contracts has stayed the same. And when it comes to Navajo Nation Council giving funds to the Navajo Nation Police Department, it's only a little bit of the general funds. So that in itself makes it problematic for the Navajo Nation Police to increase in police size. It says 775, it's over 700 police officers, but what they said is, this is what we need, but we can actually go with 500. So you see two different numbers at times. 700 is what they need, 500 is what they can settle for.
Even 500, when you think of the geography, is really a challenge because really you're talking about such a vast area. Are they looking at any new revenue sources to try to bring about this?
Right now with the ARPA, the American Relief Plan, American Recovery Plan, actually, we've gotten 1.8 billion so far, and they said it's in the coffers. But right now, what the leadership is trying to do is figure out where these monies will go. And when it comes to policing, it's not really said how much will go to them. But even during the CARES funding, that time, like a few months ago, Navajo Nation Police did not get anything except for hazard pay and PPE. They didn't get anything for equipment, for infrastructure, any of that, of the $700 million that they received from the CARES Act. So it's really up to leadership to see whether or not they want to fund the police department more so than just hazard pay, or more so than PPE, but to really invest in them with this 1.8 billion. But other than that, the funding is still the same.
There's always a tension at Navajo between the national government in Window Rock and community governments, whether they be chapters or townships. Is there any pressure to say, hey, wait, we could do policing here. We don't need to have this all be at Navajo Nation? No, actually, let me see. There are people who say that policing isn't needed. And then you go to these forums, these police forums that I've been to, and I've been to a few of them, and you hear the older people, the elders, and the community members saying, we need more policing. And that in itself is a cry for top leadership in government to say, like, okay, our community is wanting more policing. And there's been some recent forums that have happened in the communities where, that's the message. But there's only a little bit that say, we can do our own policing. We don't need Navajo Nation police. What about in terms of how the conversation is being conducted? How are they getting out in communities to talk about these issues?
Okay, well, right now, actually, they are going out there in the communities. Navajo Nation Council, Law and Order Committee, they just recently had a forum, and that's more of a call-in. So they either go in to the communities or they call in. Recently, there was a forum in Tisnaspas, Arizona, where the police department and the police chief, Philip Francisco, actually attended. And, they listened to the community's problems and issues that they see within the community and what they want police to help with.
Of course, police are not the only first responders. How are the other parts of emergency services on the Navajo Nation?
It's the same. They're all put into a division, the Department of Public Safety, and so far they've given a little bit amount directly from the ARPA funds. not from the not from the Navajo Nation government, but from the federal government, from BIA itself, and given to the Division of Public Safety. And right now they're trying to figure out how they're going to give out that funds to not only Navajo Nation police, but to corrections, to EMT, to fire department. And we also have fire departments like in Ganado that are funded by the county. They're not Navajo Nation funded. So
what else are you working on?
right now I'm working on droughts. I'm hoping to do a story on droughts on the Navajo Nation. There is a group called the Climate Change, I forget what you're called, but they're with Fish and Wildlife, Navajo Fish and Wildlife, and they're under that, and they're looking at the issues with drought and everything like that, and what they need to do and what the Navajo Nation needs to do to fix that issue, or to at least address it.
Well, and water is always an issue at Navajo anyway, even without climate change.
Oh, and then I'm just looking on to the hemp issue, as well as our controller issue that I've been writing on, and just trying to figure out what's going to be happening with those investigations and court issues.
Well, we'll keep watching for your byline. Thank you, Arlyssa Becenti.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Trahan.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. Standing
This is Indian Country Today.